Hey there, this is Andre. I haven't been around on YouTube for a little while, but there's been a lot going on, especially in the last couple of months or two. But not too long ago, I caught a new uh, streaming documentary on HBOMax, produced by Amir Questlove Thompson, The Roots, and the Jimmy Fallon House Band. And the name of the docu is To Be Celestial versus That's the Weight of the World. And this docu is about the band Earth, Wind, and Fire. Now, I'm sure most of you out there know the band from the internet holiday, celebrating their song that celebrates the 21st night of September. I think everybody knows that. And they probably know songs like Shining Star. Maybe they know Boogie Wonderland or Let's Groove. Reasons. I'm just trying to think randomly off the top of my head what Earth, Wind, and Fire mean to people today. But, when I was a teenager in the mid to late 1990s, all the message music was coming from the gangster rap in the black community. Albums like The Chronic by Dr. Dre. And it was all very cynical, we have to just party through all the bad stuff going on. I wasn't hearing anything positive at that time that wasn't coming from a religious group that had their own agenda. The only group that really offered that was a deep dive into Earth, Wind, and Fire. I saw a lot of shows like Seinfeld and things like that. The Elaine dance, with the thumbs and everything, talking about, using Earth, Wind, and Fire's Shining Star. And it was always somewhat kind of made fun of. People admired the band, but it was like they were an old 70s band with glittery outfits and, they represented another time. But when I heard you're a shining star, no matter who you are, shining bright to see who you can truly be, that was no joke to me. That sustained me through a rough time in life. And I'm going to bet a lot of you out there, when these albums came out and after, you might have felt the same thing too. So today I'm going to take a deep dive into Earth, Wind, and Fire's discography first. And I've chosen to source from my vinyl collection of Earth, Wind, and Fire's Columbia albums from that decade span from 1972, when they started at the label, to 1983. And those are the albums that basically encompassed most of their best-known and classic lineup of musicians. They had albums after that, and they had 2 albums on the Warner Brothers label with a totally different lineup. I'm not going to include the Warner Brothers albums because I don't have their first one, Earth, Wind, and Fire, which is a really excellent album that I encourage everyone seek out, because it is incredible. You can hear everything I'm about to discuss already happening there. And I can't find their amazing 1987 comeback, Touch the World, which was the first Earth, Wind, and Fire full album I ever heard. But once I get that Warner Brothers debut, and I find my copy of Touch the World, I'll talk about those. But I'm going to talk about where the band began, into their classics, and into their early 80s period here, because I have a strong connection with all of these albums, even up to today. So I'm going to start with one that's very special to me because my father told me a story about this. This is their very first Columbia album, entitled Last Days in Time, from 1972. This particular album right here, it was their first with 2 people. Philip Bailey, who, has one of the all-time greatest falsetto voices that ever lived. Period. I'm going to go on the record for that. In terms of clarity and beauty, it's just a tremendous voice. And their keyboard player, Larry Dunn, he's turning 73 as I do this today. And Larry went on to produce albums for Another man who's only on this one Earth, Wind, and Fire album, but left because he wanted to start a solo career and wasn't into being in bands. The saxophonist Ronnie Laws. And Larry would eventually also produce at least one album for the saxophonist Stanley Turrentine. So Larry Dunn is one of those keyboardists who really likes to produce and work with jazz funk piano players. But this album is actually, if you hear their Warner Brothers albums, this is not that far removed from that sound. It's a very, very heavy, chunky funk sound that dominates this. I love Time Is On Your Side. Remember the Children from this album is absolutely tremendous. You also have Philip Bailey doing some kind of softer soul covers of Make It With You and Where Have All the Flowers Gone. And the song that really brings people into this is Power, which is an 8-minute plus, jazz funk jam with a lot of Afro-Latin elements, featuring I think Andrew Woolfolk, their saxophone player, joined on this album too, and a guitarist called Roland Bautista. He's on this album. Roland would leave, and he'd come back a little bit later, but we'll get into that. But and then there's also a song at the end, Mom, She Gave Us Words of Love, that was written by Maurice White, the band's founder, and his half-brother Verdine, who's on bass. And if you've seen Verdine White on bass, the man is incomparable as a performer. He was even able to play perfect while playing on his side suspended on tour, directed by the magician Doug Hemmings. I mean, Verdine White is a musical magician. I mean, he just is. So big props to Mr. Verdine. Last Days in Time, 1972, their big Columbia introduction with the beginning of their classic lineup. But it wasn't the end, because then this arrived. This is in every way the perfect follow-up. When they got to Columbia, Last Days in Time in this featured a female singer named Jessica Cleaves. She had once been a member of the group Friends of Distinction. And after this album, she left and joined P-Funk. So, and she didn't really have a lot to do on either of these albums. She was mostly a harmony singer. Everything she would have done was done by Philip Bailey, of course, because that voice, right? And there might have been other reasons. I mean, having one woman in a group with a bunch of men, even then, might have been a bit hectic for her, having to meet the different needs that they might have. This album has a lot more longer songs on it. The biggest hit is Keep Your Head to the Sky, which Philip just sings beautifully. But it's also got Evil, which is very Santana-like, and this funk jam called Build Your Nest. And Clover is just this beautiful Afro-Brazilian cornucopia of the most beautiful musical fruit you could ever hear. Now, I'm extending the metaphors pretty heavily here, but I don't know a lot about musical notation, so I'm describing it in a way somebody with synesthesia might. Colors and shapes and tastes, that sort of thing. And this album is very flavorful. Funk, soul, jazz, Afro-Latin stuff, just all mixed together. It's just incredible. I love this picture inside, too. The band with a bouquet of flowers. All meditating. Their chest of the world. This is a very spiritual band. They were into meditation, vegetarianism, meditation. Very, very healthy lifestyle with all the drugs and things going on in the 70s at that time. These guys were very clean livers. And boy, did it show in their music. They really were 10-point. And some of the best musicians, even me not knowing it. They even did a song called Zanzibar on here, which was first done by Sergio Mendes in the Brazil 77 on their album País Tropical. I might have mispronounced that wrong, but that's Head to the Sky, 1973. Their second on Columbia. Now, the next album they did, after that, this started to change things. If you notice up there, they're introducing their famous Earth, Wind, and Fire curved logos. This is the band posed near Caribou Ranch in Colorado, which is a famous area where a lot of famous bands recorded, including a band they later, in the 2010s, I believe, do a concert with, Chicago, who are excellent. Check out my friend Scott Gallant's at Scotty's Record Shop video on Chicago. He did a great one some years ago. This is my original version. I have another version that has the gatefold, that has all members of the band in it, but it has that logo, which you may recognize from another album I'm about to see in a minute. This thing right here, you know, they're kind of doing their heavier funk thing with Mighty Mighty. They're getting into the funk a lot heavier. They have a really bluesy funk song on here called T9 She Bit, which is the most aggressive song they ever did, I think, at this point, especially lyrically. I love Fair But So Uncool on this. They're still in that Brazilian jazz mode on a lot of songs. Feeling Blue, very MPB kind of flavored, you know, Brazilian urban music. You know, they even do a cover of Spasmodic Mood, which I believe was written by Eddie Harris. I gotta look that up. I love Eddie Harris. And then Drum Song is just this very tribal, you know, percussive thing. But then you get to a song here called Devotion, and it's got that classic Earth, Wind, and Fire ballad sound that everybody knows. There was a man that Maurice White had worked with when he was in the band with Ramsey Lewis in the mid to late 60s, named Charles Stepney, who started to become really involved in their production around this. And it shows that this is really the beginning of the kind of the classic Earth, Wind, and Fire sound. But if you want to hear their music from the last two albums melding with what you know, this is the transitional record. This is where everything starts to come for the band. I heard Maurice White say in a discography, and something I'll talk about later, that he felt their sound was really coming together too. So I agree with him on this. Great album. If you only know the hit stuff that we're going to talk about in a minute, and you want something that kind of leads into it, this may be your sweet spot right here. Because, you know, the next album after that, they did a soundtrack to a movie they weren't really clear on, and I personally love this movie. I think it's a really introspective and meaningful expose, kind of truthful and maybe brutally honest about the record industry and how it treats black artists and a lot of the frontery and things that go on. And the film flopped, but the soundtrack did pretty well. That's the way of the world. This is when, you know, it's like Michael Jackson. This is their Thriller moment. This is when Earth, Wind, and Fire broke. I mean, you get Shining Star, you get That's the Way of the World, you get Reasons, but you also get songs like Africana, which again has that tribal vibe. You get songs that are just really, really intense bursts of really positive, funky African soul, like Happy Feelin', ballads like All About Love, even jazzier stuff like See the Light. You get everything here. And they recorded this in 1974. And even though the film didn't go anywhere, and I think it really should have, it was not a bad film at all, this soundtrack was light years ahead of where that was. And it's a nice portrait of the band in there. I mean, these guys were serious business in those days. Again, like I said, this was serious business, and they took their music very seriously, and so they should. These guys were some of the best. Again, I don't know music theory, but you can tell trying to play these guys' music is going to be hard, because these are some serious jazz and heavy, complex funk guys. So, you know, and Latin, Afro-Latin stuff too. So they did a live album of their performances, this, which is brilliant. They do their own version of Dvorak's New World Symphony. They do a version of Sun Goddess, which beats the album. This is from various dates. And Yearnin' Learnin' is pretty good on That's the Way of the World, but it absolutely just aces it on this. It's faster, got more of a drive. Usually I prefer the studio cuts to the live. Yearnin' Learnin' on here is one exception. But the studio cuts on this, oh my goodness, you get Sing a Song, you get Can't Hide Love, you get Sunshine, you get another great Afro-Latin one in Celebrate. I mean, everything on this album, Gratitude from 1975, is just amazing. And the title song, too, great funk jam, you know. Here's some pictures of the band during this time. You see, I think that's probably drummer Ralph Johnson floating around on his drum riser. I would love to see one of their concerts from this period. In that Be Celestial docu Questlove did, there's some footage from the tours of this era, and I'd love to see the whole thing. It looks amazing. I mean, Earth, Wind, and Fire were maybe one of the most important bands around at this point. So they were on a major musical high when they did this. This album started rough. Charles Stepney, their producer who got them where they were going to go, died of a heart attack. I think Maurice White said it was after they completed the song Getaway for this. So Maurice had to take everything he learned. He was a bit of a sponge and do this album on his own, and he aced it. I mean, you get Getaway, right? You get On Your Face, which MC Hammer sampled years later. You get the great Saturday Night, very Shining Star-like funk, and B.O., which is this intense jazz funk thing that is just beyond description in many ways. And Spirit, the title song of this, which is actually a Philip Bailey ballad that they dedicated to Charles Stepney, and it's very moving. I mean, every time I listen to that, I get a new goosebump on my body. It's just that penetrating a song. And, you know, they actually have a song on this called Earth, Wind, and Fire. And it's an amazing song, too, along with Imagination. These arrangements are very big, very advanced. Everything is very well played on. The band are at their absolute peak on this album. You cannot go wrong with this. The last 2 or 3 albums I mentioned, you cannot go wrong with this. We are in peak Earth, Wind, and Fire. And they've just been through some a difficulty. But Maurice White had worked at chess before this. He'd been a jazz drummer. He learned from Charles Stepney, like he learned from people before him. And he just moved on. I guess they did some traveling in Brazil after that. Him and his romantic partner. And I guess he and the band started doing some world travel. And they continued their peak with All in All, which is actually a deep spiritual statement illustrated here. There was maybe a little minor controversy at that time about this being kind of dark, but, you know, it's the idea of kind of, I guess, almost pantheist spirituality and just putting the Egyptian imagery on the album, you know. And this is so funny, too, because the song starts out with some serious funk on it in Serpentine Fire, you know. I didn't know what he was talking about until a friend of mine named Henrique clocked this and said Serpentine Fire is 69 beats per minute. I got it. I got the joke. I think you all do too. I don't want to ruin it for you, but 69 beats per minute, Maurice, thank you, right? So, and just, you know, you can pull the cover out like that, front cover and the back cover, and my goodness, this imagery is just incredible. I mean, I would love to see this made into like an animated film. Like, you know, one of those YouTube visualizers. I would love to see Fantasy or some song from this album. And about that, Fantasy, of course, is the big thing on this. Like, it's like black funk progressive music. And if you want serious funk, this album also gives you Jupiter, which is another very spiritual song about science and flower fragrances, things like that. You've also got this inner dialogue musically on this album called Brazilian Rhyme, which comes up again and again and again and again in different ways and different parts of it, some lighter, some funkier. And you get a great jazz fusion song on this called Runnin', which is just incredible. Really, again, shows their musicianship. You have a great soul ballad on here, Love's Holiday, incredible. Philip Bailey's kind of almost folky, I'll Write a Song for You, Be Ever Wonderful. I mean, just an incredible album. all in all, is one of my favorite Earth, Wind, and Fire albums. Again, they're firing all cylinders. Well, by this time, they get enough for a greatest hits album. And there's some great pictures of the band in here. When I first saw this, I didn't know who was who. This is my copy. My dad had a copy that I used to play to death when he let me borrow it. So I finally get a copy of my own years later. The Best of Earth, Wind, and Fire. And what's special about this is they have a couple of new songs on this, too. And one of the new songs is a great tune called Love Music, classic Earth, Wind, and Fire, and September. That's on here. Plus, it also has their version of the Beatles' Gotta Get You Into My Life from the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band movie. Even the band agrees that's one of the best parts of the movie, and it is. They come down and sing it from these pods in front of the Bee Gees in the film. I've seen the film. It's a great scene. And as Verdine White said, they don't do it the way the Beatles did it. They do it with that Chicago shuffle and the horns, as he said, the way the brothers would do it. I love that. And this was a big album, too. Now, you will not find anything from before That's the Way of the World on this. So you won't find Devotion, you won't find Head to the Sky, but for the last 3 or 4 albums we mentioned, this really encapsulates that. And just the 2 new songs, it's amazing. Well, they started working with David Foster. Maurice White had a place in Carmel, California, where he and David Foster wrote most of this record, I Am. So, you've got After the Love Is Gone, which was done by David Foster when he had a group as a duo. I've heard it. It's called Air Flight or Airplane. I can't remember right now. I'm really sorry. And Earth, Wind, and Fire had so many other collaborators. Charles Stepney, Skip Scarborough was still waving in and out of there, and all these great session people augmenting the band. And you want imagery? Yeah. This is powerful. These guys had imagery and a vibe like the English progressive rock bands were getting. They were doing that on the Afrocentric funk jazz end. And just, In the Stone, Can't Let Go, Let Your Feelings Show, Star, Rock That, just incredible. You and I, the ballad. They're just amazing, amazing songs. Boogie Wonderland isn't, but the band felt they needed to record that. But even that has some slight internal adult criticism of the disco scene. Midnight Creeps So Slowly into Hearts of Men Who Need More Than They Get. Daylight Deals a Bad Hand to a Woman Who Has Made Too Many Bets. That might clear the dance floor a little bit if you're listening to the lyrics. So, not all what you think, but this album is incredible. I think Verdine White called it their Abbey Road. Again, making the Beatles comparison. This is and this ends the 70s for them. This is the end of their classic run. In 1980, I think Verdine was one who also said the band were getting a little tired of being considered so commercial. So they wanted to cut something they wanted to cut. And they did this album in 1980, Faces. And this does include the original poster. This is a double album, kind of high priced. There was a recession in the music industry. This album was still very successful, but it's not as well known as some of the 70s ones. But it has one amazing song with an incredible music video you should see called Let Me Talk. And Let Me Talk is my anthem. 50 billion voices say let me talk. It's basically telling people not to play the role that you've been given in life to play, to speak out, get your voice heard. A very empowering message for the 80s. And the title track of this album is, again, their heavy jazz stuff. They're not the big David Foster produced album they were in the last one. But they got some great songs on here in their traditional style. Turn It Into Something Good, Pride, and Love Goes On. But again, the message music is really strong on this. As Maurice White says, and I've repeated this many times, I may disappoint you with the things I say, but deep inside a message burns within me every day. And they're doing this thing where they're tape looping their horns and playing them at double speed. Like it's MIDI, but they didn't have MIDI back then. So I love that horn effect that begins on this album, Faces, from 1980. We're getting into the early 80s, and Philip Bailey in particular has mentioned his distaste of Earth, Wind, and Fire in this period. He calls it their corporate period. And we get the album Raise. This has the song Let's Groove, which apparently the band felt pressure to do. It didn't have a message. Let this groove get you to move, to them, sounded like, go out and buy this record, please. On the other hand, that's not all that's on this album. This inner sleeve probably indicates that. This album has songs on it, really ferocious funk jams like Lady Sun, Evolution Orange, which I still don't have a clue what it's about. Some vision Maurice White probably had. And a song called These Changing Times. There's a little more of a rock guitar edge, because remember that guitarist that I talked about from Last Days in Time, Roland Bautista? He came back. Their major guitarist, Al McKay, had left by this point due to some disagreements with Maurice White. So Roland Bautista came back, and he brought a heavier rock edge. So this is like a really slick funk rock album. It also has Be My Love, and with Wanda Hutchinson from the band The Emotions, which Maurice was producing. He was producing a lot of stuff on the ARC and print. So Maurice White had his hands in a lot of things. The Emotions. So Earth, Wind, and Fire were kind of put on the back burner, but I love the imagery again. The Egyptian imagery on this album is very powerful. So if you think Let's Groove is a little played out, this album just funks and it rocks. It's amazing. It's got a zing to it, and it's definitely the beginning of their heavier 80s style. Now, if you want their serious 80s style, this. Very underrated. Maurice White said this album was not promoted properly. And I can imagine it, because this is where their heavy electronic sound at this point really integrated well with their horn section. They're starting to lose their horn section to Phil Collins. The band's starting to slowly kind of splinter. They lost their second guitarist, Johnny Graham, before this came out. But they gained a new guy who Maurice White was recommended to by Grover Washington Jr., named Stephen Greenridge. He was a Jamaican steel drummer. And he played on songs on this, like, Side by Side. This also has Fallen in Love with Me, Spread Your Love, a message song called Freedom of Choice, which is very biting. This is the best of their early 80s electro-funk albums. And I really think this deserves a revival. I know the band don't like to think of this period that much, but I feel like maybe they were cutting a little something they wanted to at this point, because this thing is just, I think this is better than Ray's. This is a tad better than Ray's. It's glittery, it's funky, it's jazzy, very incredible. The song Straight from the Heart, which is a ballad, has a little interlude at the end called Mizar. You'll hear it at the end. It's actually a piece of a song that Ramsey Lewis did with Maurice in 1969 called Uhuru. Check out the end of Straight from the Heart on Powerlight, that Mizar, and Uhuru. I would love to have heard a whole Mizar Uhuru, but whatever. Now, this album, okay, by this point they're working with people like Martin Page, and I think some of the Total people are on this. I call this the Earth, Wind plus Fire period. They started putting plus. Magnetic has all these power chords and these new wavy, I mean, it's still this lineup of the band. You know, it's still basically a lot of the original band. It's still a lot of the original band here. Okay, still a lot of the original band. But a lot of their sound is giving way to a much, much, much more electronic rocky approach. But it still has some incredible cuts. Touch is amazing. Moonwalk is an amazing record that is very soulful and funky and jazzy in a way. I also love Sweet Sassy Lady and We're Living in Our Own Time. Those are great electro-funk. The ballads here are kind of starting to lose it, but there's an overriding theme that Maurice White seems to have here about how we need to balance our lives with technology, which is very pointed today. But by far, of all these albums I pointed out, this is by far the weakest. Because I think Powerlight should have been where they ended it. But don't slouch on this. It has some amazing cuts. It's just definitely not their strongest. Now, back to the documentary. This video is going to be over 30 minutes. I know that. But it's important. Because I watched the To Be Celestial versus That's the Way of the World. And I love how it described their early period on Warner Brothers, all the members, all the wonderful things that helped Earth, Wind, and Fire grow. For the first hour of it, hour, maybe an hour and a half. It was amazing. It's over 2 hours. It's almost 2 hours long, just a minute short of 2 hours. But in the last 30 or 40 minutes, the documentary didn't seem to really be able to reconcile that while it was trying to humanize Maurice White, it ended up kind of scandalizing him because he really didn't have a lot of dirt. It just made him seem like a guy who was timid, cowardly, wasn't paying his band, was callous to his romantic partner. It just seemed petty. And so much more could have been said about those last few Earth, Wind & Fire albums I mentioned. And they sacrificed it for all the little gossip they didn't need. Now, if you want a documentary that actually explores Earth, Wind & Fire more as a musical entity and covers some of the same territory as To Be Celestial, but is a little more traditional and musical, seek out this from 2001, Earth, Wind & Fire, Shining Stars. This is an older-fashioned documentary. Hard to believe 2001 is old-fashioned, but it is. That really covers all the bases beautifully. This is probably a pretty hard DVD to get now, but if you find it on streaming, it's from Eagle Rock. Definitely get a hold of this because this goes more into the music. The new documentary, To Be Celestial, goes into their early pre-Philip Bailey years a lot stronger than this. This includes a lot more about their time being managed by Jim Brown, though. And it also includes their early 2000s comeback. I don't think either documentary goes into Touch the World enough, though, in that period. So, in the late 80s. So, I think both documentaries are missing something, but this is a good counter-documentary. If you have HBOMax, find this and watch both. There's actually clips of this in To Be Celestial. That's how powerful this docu apparently was. But get it if you can. I don't think it's on streaming right now. And this also has clips from this, also from Eagle Rock. This is a 1982 live performance, which I believe is from Oakland, California. It was itself broadcast on HBO. I've seen a lot of live performances on video. I've been to some live shows. And we're talking about, I've seen shows by Prince, Michael Jackson, Beatle live performances, Rolling Stone live performances. I saw Hall & Oates, Trombone Shorty, and Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings before she died in Bangor. Incredible show. None of these things had anything on what this is. This is not just a concert. This is like pre-Cirque du Soleil. Basically, Maurice White actually goes into this whole sketch where he's basically his own version of a Jedi, like in Star Wars. There's all this Pan-African symbolism, and it just gives me goosebumps just to see any clips of this, how beautifully it's choreographed, how beautifully it's done. So these are the ultimate Earth, Wind & Fire experiences to me. Now, I know there was a lot more to tell, but the reason I did this video is because today is Juneteenth. Basically the African-American equivalent of 4th of July. And there's a lot of division within the community on whether we should be just Black Americans or whether we should be African Americans, American descendants of slaves, whatever. Earth, Wind & Fire, to me, represent Black, Latin, Afro-Latin, spiritual, musical, funky, soul, jazz, unity at its absolute finest. I don't think any other band has been able to take all those elements as they did, as Maurice White did when he named the band after what he saw in his astrological chart, and put them together the way they did. And I think every band who tries are probably emulating them. So I'm thankful the new documentary came out despite its flaws. I'm glad we had an old one. And I'm glad I could come here and talk to you about all of this wonderful music, which I think we hear still today. We hear so much about the Beatles. We hear about The Who, Jimi Hendrix, Pet Sounds, Brian Wilson, Pink Floyd, and deservedly so. They're all amazing people. But this band right here, Earth, Wind & Fire, should be discussed in the exact same sentence. This is an arena-level classic music. And I hope the documentary changes how Earth, Wind, and Fire are discussed, because they are so important in a way maybe we don't understand yet. I know they were important to me, musically and to my heart and my mind. So until next time, happy Juneteenth for today. Happy Black Music Month. That's another reason why I'm doing this. Happy birthday, Earth, Wind, and Fire keyboardist Larry Dunn. Happy birthday to you. And I'm so happy this documentary is coming out. Again, even with its imperfections, conversations are being had. And if the focus is on their music and what they're intending to say with it, I don't think anything but good can come from that. See you next time.